15-year-old Ethan Crumbley walked through the hallways of Oxford High School on November 30, 2021, with a 9mm semi-automatic handgun hidden in his backpack. The morning had started like any other Tuesday at the suburban Michigan school. Students shuffling to classes, teachers preparing lessons, the cafeteria filling with the buzz of teenage conversation. But by 12:51 p.m., 4 students would be dead, 7 others wounded, and an entire community would be shattered by one of the deadliest school shootings in Michigan's history. Ethan didn't run. He didn't try to escape. When deputies arrived and ordered him to the ground, he complied immediately, his hands still covered in gunpowder residue, his eyes empty and cold. 2 years later, at 17 years old, Ethan Crumbley would become the first teenager in decades to be sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole for a school shooting, a sentence that sparked national debate about juvenile justice, parental responsibility, and whether a child can ever be beyond redemption. If you're watching this video, please take a moment to hit that subscribe button and let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Your support helps us continue bringing these important stories to light. Oxford High School sits in Oakland County, Michigan, approximately 40 miles north of Detroit. It's the kind of place that epitomizes suburban American normalcy, a town of about 22,000 people where families know each other, where football games draw crowds on Friday nights, where students walk to school through tree-lined neighborhoods that seem insulated from the violence that plagues larger cities. The high school itself is a sprawling complex of modern brick buildings, with wide hallways adorned with student artwork and trophy cases celebrating athletic achievements and academic honors. It was, by all accounts, a good school in a good town where parents felt their children were safe. Ethan Robert Crumbley was born on April 28, 2006, in Atlantic Beach, Florida, a small coastal town about 15 miles east of Jacksonville. His parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, were young when they had Ethan. Jennifer was in her early 20s, James in his mid-20s. Both had working-class backgrounds and struggled financially in those early years, bouncing between jobs and apartments as they tried to establish stability for their small family. Court records would later reveal that both parents had minor criminal histories: DUIs, check fraud, unpaid bills, the kind of petty offenses that speak to financial instability and poor decision-making rather than serious criminality. When Ethan was still a toddler, the family moved to Issaquah, Washington, a suburb of Seattle, where James and Jennifer both found work in business development and marketing. Neighbors in their Washington apartment complex would later describe the Crumbleys as distant, uninvolved parents who frequently left young Ethan alone while they went out drinking. One neighbor, Margaret Chen, told investigators after the shooting that she had been so concerned about the amount of time Ethan spent alone, sometimes entire evenings and weekends when he was just 6 or 7 years old, that she filed an anonymous report with Child Protective Services. She never knew if anyone followed up on her complaint. In 2014, when Ethan was 8 years old, the family moved again, this time to Michigan, settling first in Lake Orion before eventually buying a small house in Oxford. The moves were frequent enough that Ethan never developed lasting friendships, never found his footing in any particular community. Teachers in Michigan described him as quiet, withdrawn, a student who did acceptable work but never stood out, never caused trouble, never really connected with anyone. He was, in the assessment of multiple educators who taught him between 4th and 9th grade, essentially invisible, not troublesome enough to warrant intervention, not struggling enough to require extra help, just there. But behind the facade of this quiet, unremarkable teenager, something dark was growing. Ethan's internet search history, recovered after the shooting, revealed a descent into violent obsession that had been building for years. As early as 2019, when he was just 13 years old, Ethan was researching school shootings, watching videos of previous attacks, reading manifestos written by other killers. He visited forums where users discussed mass casualty events in analytical terms, debating tactics and body counts as if they were discussing video game strategies. He bookmarked articles about the Columbine shooting, the Sandy Hook massacre, the Parkland attack. He studied what worked and what didn't. He was learning. In March 2021, 8 months before the shooting, Ethan's behavior took a more disturbing turn. He began sending text messages to his mother describing paranoid delusions, claims that there were demons in the house, that ghosts were watching him, that he was hearing voices. Jennifer Crumbley's response, documented in recovered text messages, was dismissive, bordering on cruel. "Stop being weird," she texted back. "Go to bed." When Ethan persisted, describing increasingly detailed and frightening experiences, his mother told him he was being dramatic and suggested he take Benadryl to help him sleep. She never took him to see a doctor, never arranged for a mental health evaluation, never took his pleas for help seriously. Around the same time, Ethan began exhibiting behavior that should have been impossible to ignore. He videotaped himself torturing animals, small birds and rodents that he would capture and then mutilate while narrating his actions to the camera. He showed some of these videos to classmates, who later told investigators they thought Ethan was weird and creepy, but didn't report what they'd seen because they didn't want to be seen as snitches. In one particularly disturbing incident reported by multiple students, Ethan brought a dead baby bird's head to school in a jar and placed it in a bathroom, then waited outside to watch people's reactions when they discovered it. When confronted by a teacher about the incident, Ethan claimed he'd found the jar and didn't know what was inside. No disciplinary action was taken. His parents' response to these escalating warning signs was not intervention, but enabling. In the summer of 2021, just months before the shooting, James Crumbley took his son to a shooting range and taught him how to handle firearms. They went regularly, sometimes weekly, and James would post photos on social media of himself and Ethan at the range, both smiling, both holding weapons. On November 26, 2021, just 4 days before the shooting, James and Ethan went to a gun store together, where James purchased a 9mm Sig Sauer semi-automatic handgun. He bought it as an early Christmas present for his son. Jennifer posted a photo on Instagram that same day showing the gun with the caption, "Mom and Son Day, testing out his new Christmas present." The gun was stored in an unlocked drawer in James and Jennifer's bedroom. The ammunition was in another unlocked drawer nearby. Ethan had unrestricted access to both. When questioned later about why they didn't secure the weapon, especially given Ethan's increasingly concerning behavior, James Crumbley told investigators he thought Ethan was responsible enough to be around guns, and that he trusted him. This trust, this spectacular failure of parental judgment, would cost 4 students their lives. On November 29, 2021, the day before the shooting, a teacher at Oxford High School discovered Ethan searching for ammunition on his phone during class. The teacher reported this to school administrators, who called Jennifer Crumbley to inform her. Her response, documented in text messages recovered from her phone, was not concern, but annoyance. "LOL. I'm not mad. You have to learn not to get caught," she texted to Ethan after getting off the phone with the school. She never asked why her son was looking at ammunition, never questioned whether he had access to the gun they'd just bought him, never considered that this might be a red flag worth investigating. That same evening, Ethan created a video on his phone. In it, he narrated his plans for the following day. "I'm going to be the next school shooter," he said into the camera, his voice flat and emotionless. "It's going to be fun. Tomorrow will be remembered forever." He detailed his targets, his route through the school, his expectations for how many people he could kill before police arrived. He talked about wanting to become famous, about making sure everyone knew his name, about finally being seen instead of ignored. He ended the video by holding up the Sig Sauer handgun his father had bought him and saying, "See you tomorrow, Oxford." He saved the video to his phone but didn't post it publicly. It would be discovered by police during their investigation of his digital devices after the shooting. The morning of November 30th, 2021, began with another red flag that should have stopped everything before it started. Ethan's first-period geometry teacher, Nicholas Ejak, found a drawing on Ethan's desk that immediately alarmed him. The drawing depicted a semi-automatic handgun pointed at the words, "The thoughts won't stop. Help me." Below that was a drawing of a bullet with the words, "Blood everywhere," written above it. There was also a sketch of a person who appeared to have been shot, with the words, "My life is useless," and "The world is dead," written nearby. Teacher Ejak immediately photographed the drawing and brought it to school counselors. School counselor Shawn Hopkins called Ethan into his office at 10 a.m. Ethan claimed the drawings were for a video game he was designing. He said the violent imagery was just part of the creative process and insisted he had no thoughts of harming himself or others. Hopkins documented the meeting but, crucially, did not search Ethan's backpack, which at that very moment contained the loaded 9mm handgun, 2 full magazines of ammunition, and additional loose rounds. Hopkins called both of Ethan's parents and told them they needed to come to the school immediately for a meeting. James and Jennifer Crumbley arrived at Oxford High School at approximately 10:30 a.m. In the meeting, which included Ethan, his parents, Hopkins, and Principal Stephen Wolfe, the adults discussed the disturbing drawings. Ethan again claimed they were related to video game design. His parents did not mention that they had just bought him a real gun 4 days earlier. They did not mention that Jennifer had been texted by the school the previous day about Ethan searching for ammunition. They did not mention the months of concerning behavior, the violent videos, the text messages about demons and voices. When school administrators said they wanted Ethan to begin counseling within 48 hours, Jennifer and James agreed, but said they both had to return to work immediately and couldn't take Ethan home at that moment. The school, believing the parents' assurances that there was no immediate danger, allowed Ethan to return to class. His backpack, containing the murder weapon, went with him. At 12:51 p.m., Ethan Crumbley walked out of a bathroom on the 2nd floor of Oxford High School with the 9mm handgun in his hand and began shooting. His first target was in the hallway. He fired at a group of students without warning, hitting 16-year-old Tate Meyer, a popular football player and honor student. Tate collapsed immediately, a bullet having struck him in the chest. Students began screaming and running in all directions. Ethan walked calmly through the chaos, methodically aiming and firing at anyone in his path. He entered a nearby classroom and shot 14-year-old Hannah St. Juliana as she tried to hide behind a desk. The bullet struck her in the neck. He fired again, hitting her in the torso as she fell. She died within seconds. Students in the classroom dove under desks, pressed themselves against walls. Some tried to barricade the door. Ethan moved to another classroom and fired through the window in the door, hitting 17-year-old Madison Baldwin, who was trying to help secure the door to keep the shooter out. The bullet struck her in the chest. She died before paramedics could reach her. Teachers immediately initiated lockdown procedures, locking classroom doors, turning off lights, moving students away from windows. But the shooting had happened so quickly, in such rapid succession, that many students and teachers didn't yet realize what was happening. The fire alarm had been pulled by someone trying to trigger an evacuation, creating confusion about whether this was a drill or a real emergency. Some students ran toward exits, thinking it was a fire. Some ran directly into the hallway where Ethan was still shooting. 17-year-old Justin Schilling had been in the bathroom when the shooting started. He heard the gunfire and the screaming and hid in a stall, trying to stay silent, texting his family that there was an active shooter and he loved them. Ethan systematically checked each bathroom, opening stalls, looking for victims. When he found Justin, he ordered him out of the stall. Justin complied, his hands raised, begging for his life. Ethan shot him execution style at point-blank range in the head. Justin collapsed, critically wounded but still alive. He would be rushed to the hospital but would die from his injuries the following day, bringing the total death toll to 4. In total, the shooting lasted between 4 and 5 minutes. Ethan fired approximately 30 rounds, killing 4 students and wounding 7 others. When Oakland County Sheriff's deputies arrived at the school at 12:55 p.m., responding to multiple 911 calls, they found Ethan walking down a hallway with the gun still in his hand. "Sheriff's office, drop the weapon!" The order was shouted by Deputy Russ Hudson, who had his own weapon drawn and aimed at the teenager. Ethan immediately complied. He set the gun on the floor, raised his hands, and got down on his knees, then onto his stomach. He offered no resistance as he was handcuffed. He said nothing. His expression, according to multiple officers at the scene, was utterly blank. No fear, no remorse, no emotion of any kind. Just emptiness. The scene inside Oxford High School was one of absolute chaos and horror. Students were running through hallways, screaming, crying, trying to escape. Teachers were performing first aid on wounded students with whatever materials they could find. T-shirts to stop bleeding, belts as makeshift tourniquets. The injured were triaged in the parking lot while ambulances arrived in a continuous stream. Parents, having heard about the shooting through news reports and frantic texts from their children, converged on the school in a state of panic, trying to find their kids, desperate for information. Police established a perimeter and began the systematic process of evacuating the building, room by room, ensuring the shooter had acted alone and there were no additional threats. Tate Meyer, the 16-year-old football player who had been shot in the hallway, was loaded into a patrol car by deputies who made the split-second decision that they couldn't wait for an ambulance. His injuries were too severe, and every second counted. They rushed him to McLaren Oakland Hospital in Pontiac, with deputies and a teacher performing CPR in the back seat of the cruiser. But despite their heroic efforts, Tate was pronounced dead at the hospital at 1:23 p.m. The image of his fellow students carrying him to that patrol car, trying to save him, would become one of the most heartbreaking symbols of the tragedy. The investigation began immediately, led by Oakland County Sheriff Michael Bouchard. Ethan was transported to the Oakland County Jail and placed in isolation in the juvenile section. He was read his Miranda rights and immediately invoked his right to remain silent and requested an attorney. The brief interrogation that occurred before his attorney arrived revealed only that Ethan showed no signs of distress, made no statements of remorse, and appeared unnervingly calm given what he had just done. When asked if he understood that people had died, he nodded. When asked if he felt bad about it, he shrugged. The interview was terminated, and Ethan was returned to his cell. Meanwhile, investigators were processing multiple crime scenes. The hallways, classrooms, and bathrooms where the shooting had occurred, Ethan's backpack and locker, and most critically, the Crumbley home. Search warrants were executed within hours. At the Crumbley residence, investigators found the gun safe where the Sig Sauer should have been stored. It was open and empty. They found ammunition stored unsecured in multiple locations throughout the house. They found Ethan's bedroom, which was a shrine to violence, walls covered with printouts of previous mass shooters, notebooks filled with violent drawings and writings, a computer whose search history documented months of research into school shootings, guns, and body counts. They also found text messages between Ethan and his parents that painted a disturbing picture of a family in profound dysfunction. Messages where Ethan begged his mother for help with his mental health, and she told him to stop being dramatic. Messages where Jennifer complained about Ethan being needy and annoying. Messages where James discussed taking Ethan shooting, but never once discussed getting him therapy or counseling. The digital evidence painted a clear picture. Ethan Crumbley had been planning this attack for months, had communicated his deteriorating mental state to his parents, and they had responded by buying him a gun. The 4 victims of the Oxford High School shooting each had bright futures that were stolen from them in an instant. Tate Meyer, 16, was a star athlete with a 3.5 GPA who had just earned a football scholarship to Toledo University. His teammates described him as a natural leader, the kind of person who made everyone around him better. On the morning of the shooting, Tate had texted his parents a joke and told them he loved them, the last communication they would receive from their son. Hannah St. Donna St. Juliana, 14, was an artist and basketball player who lit up every room she entered with her infectious smile and boundless energy. She had plans to try out for the varsity basketball team the following year and dreamed of studying art in college. Her sister Raina would later testify at Ethan's sentencing that losing Hannah felt like losing a piece of her own soul, that life without her sister's laughter and light was almost unbearable. Madison Baldwin, 17, was a straight-A student who had just been accepted to several colleges with plans to study forensic science. She was an aspiring artist who painted in her free time and volunteered at a local animal shelter. Her mother, Nicole, would later describe Madison as her best friend, saying that the pain of losing her daughter was so profound that she could barely function, that she still set a place for Madison at the dinner table, because accepting she was gone was impossible. Justin Schilling, 17, was a member of the bowling team and an amateur mechanic who loved working on cars with his stepfather. He was planning to attend trade school to become an automotive technician and had dreams of opening his own shop one day. His family would describe the agonizing 24 hours between when he was shot and when he died in the hospital. The hope they held that he might survive, and the devastating moment when doctors told them there was nothing more they could do. The 7 students who survived their injuries faced months of physical therapy and years of psychological trauma. One student, Kylie Osage, who was shot in the shoulder, would describe in later interviews the sound of the gunfire, the feeling of the bullet impact, the terror of not knowing if the shooter was coming back. Another survivor, Keegan Gregory, grappled with survivor's guilt, unable to understand why he had lived when his friends had died. All of the survivors would struggle with PTSD, anxiety, depression, and the fundamental loss of security that comes from having your school, a place that should be safe, turned into a war zone. The decision to charge Ethan Crumbley as an adult was made by Oakland County Prosecutor Karen McDonald within 48 hours of the shooting. Under Michigan law, juveniles aged 14 and older can be tried as adults for serious crimes, and given the severity of the offense, 4 counts of first-degree murder, 7 counts of assault with intent to murder, and 12 counts of possession of a firearm in the commission of a felony, McDonald determined that adult charges were appropriate. The announcement sparked immediate debate, with child advocacy groups arguing that a 15-year-old's brain is not fully developed and that the juvenile justice system exists precisely for cases like this. But McDonald was resolute. These were not impulsive acts. This was planned. He brought a gun to school. He methodically killed 4 students. These are adult crimes deserving of adult consequences. In an unprecedented move, McDonald also announced that she would be charging Ethan's parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, with 4 counts each of involuntary manslaughter. This was believed to be the first time in U.S. history that parents of a school shooter were charged criminally for their child's actions. McDonald's reasoning was clear. The Crumbleys had not merely failed to prevent the shooting, they had enabled it. They had purchased the weapon. They had given Ethan access to it. They had ignored warning signs for months. They had been called to the school the morning of the shooting and been shown clear evidence of their son's violent ideation. And they had done nothing. Their egregious failures, McDonald argued, made them criminally liable for the deaths their son caused. Ethan's attorney, appointed by the court given his status as a minor, was Paulette Michelle Lofton, a veteran public defender experienced in juvenile cases. Lofton faced an almost impossible task. Her client had been caught at the scene with the murder weapon. There was surveillance footage of the shooting. There were dozens of witnesses. There was Ethan's own digital evidence showing months of planning. A not guilty verdict was out of the question. Lofton's strategy became focused on the sentencing phase, arguing that despite the horror of the crime, Ethan was still a child whose brain was not fully developed, who had been failed by his parents and the mental health system, and who deserved the possibility of rehabilitation rather than a life sentence without parole. The case took an unexpected turn in October 2022, when Ethan Crumbley pleaded guilty to all 24 charges against him. This was not part of a plea deal. There was no agreement with prosecutors for a reduced sentence. Ethan simply admitted guilt to every charge. His attorney explained that he wanted to take responsibility for his actions and spare the victims' families the trauma of a trial. But there was speculation that Ethan's decision was also strategic. By pleading guilty, he maintained control over his narrative, avoided cross-examination that might reveal unflattering details, and could focus entirely on the sentencing phase, where his youth and mental health would be emphasized. The sentencing hearing, held in December 2023, was one of the most emotional proceedings in Michigan legal history. It lasted over 7 hours and featured testimony from survivors, victims' families, school staff, and mental health experts. Prosecutor McDonald presented evidence of Ethan's planning, his lack of remorse, and his stated goal of becoming infamous. She played video recordings Ethan had made in the hours before the shooting, including one where he calmly described his plan to kill everyone at the school and said he hoped to achieve a high body count. She read from his journal entries where he wrote about wanting to be remembered, about watching videos of previous school shooters and studying their techniques. The defense presented testimony from forensic psychologist Colin King, who had evaluated Ethan and diagnosed him with several mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, and possible psychotic features. Dr. King testified that Ethan had experienced auditory and visual hallucinations in the months before the shooting, that he had desperately sought help from his parents and been ignored, and that his actions, while horrific, were the result of an untreated and deteriorating mental health crisis. Dr. King argued that, with proper treatment, medication, and years of intensive therapy, Ethan could potentially be rehabilitated. But the most powerful testimony came from the victims' families. One by one, they took the stand and addressed Ethan directly, describing the devastation his actions had caused. Buck Meyer, Tate's father, spoke of the future his son would never have, the wedding that would never happen, the grandchildren he and his wife would never meet, the gaping hole in their family that could never be filled. He looked directly at Ethan and said, "You took my son from me. You took away every future moment we would have shared. You destroyed our family." Raina St. Juliana, Hannah's older sister, described the pain of losing her best friend, her little sister, her partner in everything. "Loving Hannah shouldn't be this painful," she said through tears. "Life isn't supposed to be this paralyzing. I wake up every morning and for just a second, I forget she's gone. And then I remember. And I have to live through losing her all over again, every single day." Nicole Beausoleil, Madison's mother, addressed Ethan with barely contained rage. "You murdered my daughter while she was trying to save her classmates. She died a hero, protecting others. And you? You will rot. No one will forgive you. No one will remember you with anything but contempt." Justin Schilling's parents described the 24 hours between when their son was shot and when he died. The hope they held on to, the prayers they said, the moment the doctors told them Justin's brain damage was too severe and he would not survive. "You shot my son execution style," his father said. "You made him beg for his life, and then you killed him anyway. You are not a child. You are a monster." Through all of this testimony, Ethan sat at the defense table, head bowed, occasionally wiping his eyes but showing little visible emotion. Before the judge pronounced sentence, Ethan was given the opportunity to address the court. He stood, his voice quiet and shaking, and said, "I want everyone to know that I am sorry. I cannot give you a good reason for what I did because there isn't one. I'm not making excuses. I know I'm a bad person. I have done terrible things that no one should ever do. The victims' families are going to have to live with what I did for the rest of their lives. I hope they can find some peace, but I don't think they can. I really am sorry for what I did." His apology was met with scoffs and angry murmurs from the victims' families. To them, his words rang hollow, too little, too late, and insufficient to address the magnitude of what he had done. Judge Kwame Rowe, who had presided over the case from the beginning, took several minutes before announcing his sentence. He acknowledged the legal arguments about Ethan's age and brain development. He referenced a 2012 Supreme Court decision, Miller v. Alabama, which held that mandatory life without parole sentences for juveniles were unconstitutional except in the rarest of cases. But Judge Rowe determined that this was precisely one of those rare cases. "Mr. Crumbley, you have committed unspeakable acts of violence," Judge Rowe began. "You planned this attack for months. You researched school shootings. You prepared your weapon. You created videos describing your intentions. On the day of the shooting, you were given multiple opportunities to stop. Your teacher found your drawings. Counselors spoke with you. Your parents were called to the school. At any point, you could have asked for help. Instead, you proceeded with your plan. Judge Rowe continued. You shot most of your victims multiple times. You hunted them down. You executed Justin Schilling when he begged for his life. You showed no mercy, and you have shown minimal remorse. You stated in your own videos that you did this for notoriety, that you wanted to be remembered. Well, you will be remembered as the person who destroyed lives, who devastated a community, who traumatized an entire generation of students who now wonder if they're safe in their own schools. The evidence in this case is overwhelming that you are not amenable to rehabilitation within the juvenile justice system. You are intelligent enough to understand your actions. You planned meticulously, and you carried out those plans with cold calculation. This was not an impulsive act by a troubled child. This was terrorism. Judge Rowe then pronounced sentence. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole on all 4 counts of first-degree murder. You will serve these sentences consecutively with the sentences for assault and weapons charges, meaning you will spend the rest of your natural life in prison. You will never be released.
You will die behind bars. The courtroom erupted. Some family members sobbed in relief. Others shouted approval. Ethan showed no visible reaction. He was led from the courtroom in shackles and transported to the Michigan Department of Corrections, where he would begin serving his sentence. At 17 years old, Ethan Crumbley became one of the youngest people in the United States to receive a true life sentence, with no possibility of release. The case against James and Jennifer Crumbley proceeded separately and became a landmark prosecution. Both parents were tried on 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, with prosecutors arguing that their gross negligence directly contributed to the deaths of the 4 students. The evidence against them was damning. Text messages showed Jennifer dismissing Ethan's pleas for mental health help. Records showed they had repeatedly failed to secure the gun they purchased for him. Testimony revealed that when called to the school the morning of the shooting, after Ethan's violent drawings were discovered, they had minimized the concerns, refused to take Ethan home, and never mentioned that he had access to a real gun. Jennifer Crumbley's trial in February 2024 resulted in a conviction on all 4 counts. The prosecution successfully argued that she had been grossly negligent in her duties as a parent, and that her failures directly enabled the shooting. She was sentenced to 10 to 15 years in prison. James Crumbley was convicted in a separate trial in March 2024 and received the same sentence. The convictions were historic, the first time parents of a school shooter had been held criminally responsible for their child's actions. The verdicts sent a message to parents nationwide. You cannot ignore warning signs. You cannot provide access to weapons. You cannot abdicate your responsibilities and escape consequences when tragedy results. The Oxford community struggled to heal in the aftermath of the shooting. The high school remained closed for months while investigations continued and repairs were made. When it finally reopened, metal detectors had been installed. Security protocols had been completely revamped, and a permanent memorial had been established honoring the 4 victims. Many students chose to transfer to other schools, unable to return to the place where they had experienced such trauma. Those who did return described the school as forever changed, the carefree atmosphere replaced by constant vigilance, the assumption of safety shattered permanently. A massive civil lawsuit was filed by the families of victims and survivors against the school district, alleging that administrators had failed to act on multiple warning signs and had negligently allowed Ethan to remain in school the day of the shooting, despite clear evidence of danger. The lawsuit was settled for $4.5 million, with the district admitting no wrongdoing, but implementing sweeping changes to its threat assessment protocols. The debate about how to prevent future school shootings intensified in the wake of Oxford.
Some advocates pushed for stricter gun control laws, including safe storage requirements and red flag laws that would allow firearms to be temporarily removed from individuals showing signs of danger. Others focused on mental health, arguing for better access to counseling, earlier intervention for troubled youth, and mandatory threat assessment training for all school staff. Still others pushed for enhanced school security, more resource officers, better surveillance systems, panic buttons in every classroom. Michigan passed Ethan's Law in 2024, named in a grim twist after the perpetrator, requiring all firearms in homes with minors to be stored in locked safes and establishing criminal penalties for parents whose unsecured guns are used by children to commit crimes. The law faced opposition from gun rights groups who argued it infringed on Second Amendment rights, but it passed with bipartisan support, driven by the overwhelming public reaction to the Oxford shooting and the Crumbley parents' trial. For the families of Hannah, Tate, Madison, and Justin, no law, no sentence, no policy change could bring back their children. They established foundations in their children's names, channeling their grief into action. The Tate Meir Foundation provides scholarships to student athletes. The Hannah St. Juliana Memorial Fund supports youth arts programs. The Madison Baldwin Scholarship helps students pursuing careers in forensic science. The Justin Schilling Memorial Foundation provides support for students entering skilled trades. As of October 2025, Ethan Crumbley is incarcerated at a maximum security prison in Michigan, where he will remain for the rest of his life. He is housed in a special unit for youthful offenders, though he will be transferred to the general adult population when he turns 21. Reports from corrections officers describe him as compliant, quiet, and withdrawn. He participates in limited educational programs available to him and has declined most interview requests from media. He has written letters of apology to his victims' families, though none have indicated they wanted to receive them. His parents, James and Jennifer Crumbley, are serving their sentences in separate Michigan prisons. Both are eligible for parole after serving their minimum sentences of 10 years. Both have given interviews claiming they are victims themselves, arguing that they couldn't have known what their son was planning. These claims have been met with universal scorn from the public and victims' families, who point to the overwhelming evidence that the Crumbleys were negligent at best and complicit at worst. The Oxford High School shooting stands as a turning point in American discussions about school violence, parental responsibility, and juvenile justice. It demonstrated that even in affluent suburban communities with good schools and good families, tragedy can strike when warning signs are ignored. It established legal precedent that parents can and will be held criminally responsible when their negligence enables their children to commit mass violence. And it raised profound questions about whether children who commit such heinous acts can ever truly be rehabilitated, or whether some crimes are so severe that even youth cannot shield perpetrators from life sentences. For the survivors who were in Oxford High School that day, the shooting will always be a defining moment of their lives. Many have become advocates for gun violence prevention, speaking at rallies, meeting with legislators, and sharing their stories in hopes of preventing future tragedies. They describe living with hypervigilance, with anxiety every time they hear a loud noise, with the inability to feel fully safe in public spaces. They talk about the friends they lost and the innocence that was stolen from them. And they carry forward the memories of Tate, Hannah, Madison, and Justin, 4 bright lights that were extinguished too soon by a troubled boy with a gun, and parents who failed in their most basic duty to protect not just their own child, but all the children around him. The case of Ethan Crumbley forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about the intersection of mental health, gun access, parental negligence, and school safety. It demonstrates that there are rarely single causes or simple solutions to school violence. Ethan was a deeply troubled teenager who desperately needed help. He was failed by his parents, who ignored his obvious distress and armed him instead of treating him. He was failed by a system that didn't have adequate mechanisms to intervene when teachers and counselors saw warning signs. And he made a choice, a terrible, irreversible choice, to respond to his pain by inflicting pain on innocent people.
4 students who did nothing wrong, who were simply trying to get through a normal school day, paid with their lives for all of these failures. 7 others carry physical and psychological scars. An entire community was traumatized, and a teenage boy, who at 15 should have been worried about grades and friends and his future, instead became a murderer who will spend the next 6 or 7 decades in prison before he dies there, never having experienced adult life outside of a cell. There is no redemption in this story, no silver lining, no way to make sense of such senseless violence. There is only grief, anger, and the desperate hope that somehow, someday, we will find ways to prevent the next Ethan Crumbley from taking the next gun to the next school to murder the next group of innocent children. Until then, the Oxford community, and all the communities that have experienced similar tragedies, carry on, forever changed, forever scarred, forever remembering the lives that were stolen and the futures that will never be.